So we're moving into our final TPBA project report submission, and I wanted to just spend some time with you going over our rubric so that you would have an understanding of what would be expected on this. Before I do this, though, I'd like for you to get out your TPBA Administrative Manual and open that to page 185 so that we can reference this document as we move along. So I'm going to pause for just a second and ask you to stop and get your book. So you'll notice when you look on page 185 that this is where we're covering a lot of the demographic information. They have an area here for the reason for the referral, and I do want to point out to your attention that the reason for referral is important because it serves us as a guide for the purpose of the evaluation. It really helps the evaluation team, to know what it is that the parents are wanting to address, their reason for doing this assessment when we come together. So you will need to make sure that you have included this information from the routines in All About Me and the Child and Family History as you begin that, and that was found in M13. So if you haven't printed out those documents, and they're pretty lengthy, but if you want to just make sure that you reference that, because you do need to, again, make sure you have that family component in this report. We are doing a SWADO, TPBA, sorry, because we didn't want to ask you to go out and do a family and stuff, but we don't want to drop the family in doing this, so keep them in mind. As you move through this, the next thing that we're looking at are the domains. And when you do your report, you just want to take a minute to type in and clearly describe, so that a parent or anyone who is reading this document will have a basic understanding about what some of our terms are. So, what does it mean to look at a cognitive area? What do we mean when we say sensory motor? So this is kind of just an intro to the report that helps those people who are reading it understand what some of our terms are. The big part with this particular section of the report is our health and history. And so if you will look again on page 187, you might just want to skim this along. But Chapter 8 is going to ask us to include information here about the child's history. So again, we're looking at that parent component, and we're looking for developmental milestones. Did the child walk, at a typical age? Were there any risk factors in regards to maybe a premature birth, or the mother's health, or environmental factors? Do we have perceived patterns and perceived strengths and weaknesses that we should be aware of? And the one thing I really want you to look at on page 187 is kind of spending some time as a group to establish what the parent questions were. Why was this particular parent asking for an evaluation? Sometimes an agency or someone else will ask for an evaluation, but with Draco we have this parent, and she just wants to get some information about Draco. So what are a couple of questions that you might have in here that would help an evaluation team really focus in and zero in on the purpose of this evaluation? With some kids, it's going to be really obvious, why we're doing an evaluation. But with other kids, sometimes we need to make sure that, particularly a child who has multiple needs, we need to kind of break that down and make sure that we're looking at things collectively and collaboratively. The classroom observation area, when you're looking at your report on page 187 and 188, this is a real, TPBA that they have here. We were just watching videos. Okay, so for our purposes, I'd like for you to summarize, kind of a SWADO or a little model here of what we saw Draco doing across settings. And you will need to make sure that you do this. I think we had 6 settings here with Draco. And so, just a real quick and dirty summary here about what it was we were looking at when we began to do our observations on Draco. Oops, A little bit of the wrong page there. All right, now we break it into our developmental observations. You have sensory motor, you have emotional and social, the language and communication, and the cognitive. And you can see that the rubric is going to be the same for each one of these. All right. When you are doing your developmental observation or you're summarizing that information, again, look at your report. It starts with sensory motor on page 188. You'll notice there that they're clearly citing the child's behavior. In our case, again, we're going to be looking at the videos. And because this has been a large focus of our class, you need to make sure that you are showing evidence of guidance from the TPBA ages tables and the observation guidelines. And if you've done a really good job on those, the documents that you've submitted, you're just going to be taking the information that you have from your reports and you're just going to be embedding it into this. Would like to see evidence here that, you've seen indicators of sensory motor or emotional and social, whatever it is that you're looking at, over 2 settings or 2 videos and not just one observation. And that, again, is why it was really important that you watched all the films and not just focused or zeroed in on one of those. So you're going to do the same for each one of those domains. You will notice in the book that there are a couple things that they have that we aren't going to have on ours. On page 188, they have a little brief discussion there about behavior during testing. We're not doing that because we did not have that teacher facilitator. We didn't see an adult actually. We did in one scene, but we didn't have a facilitator who was kind of observing Draco and digging in a little bit deeper with him. This is always put into a report just to make sure that there was a good rapport between the teacher facilitator or the play-based facilitator and the child. But again, you can X that out. You don't need to worry about doing that for this report. And the child that they have in that report needed a sensory profile, and we won't be having that. So you can kind of just put a pencil mark through that or just, mentally make a note that that's not going to be something that we'll be including for our purposes. I am going to go ahead now, and you might want to take a minute just to skim each one of these samples that they have so that you get a pretty good feel for what's expected as you begin to write your report. But if we move to page 191 and we get to the summary of assessment results, this is our rubric or what we'll be looking for that. So when we look at a summary, what I don't want to see is that you've just kind of rehashed or restated what was said earlier in the work. All right. The summary should clearly integrate and show how all of this information is interrelated. So it takes the parent history, the history and observations, all of the stuff that we've looked at, and it puts it together into a cohesive document. Now, one of the things that you're going to be doing here is that you're going to be taking this child rating that we did, and that's going to be on the observation summary forms that we had. And let me just pull that up so you can kind of remember what that looks like. So what we see here on this page is the TPBA observation summary form. This is the one for the emotional and social development here. But when we rate the child, and you've already done this, but I do want this is where you're going to list whether the child is functioning above average, typical, whether they're, with a watch or a concern. And so this is that great little area in here in your report where you can utilize this information as part of the summary. So that's why it wasn't mentioned earlier. So moving back to our report, if we look at the example that they have on page 192, you'll see that they have some references to specific skill levels, referencing a 37-month-old level, looking at a 4.5 to 5-year-old range. These are the kinds of things that you would be documenting underneath your summary, again, making sure that you're just cohesively tying all this information together to include any highs or lows that you saw from the age tables, any gaps, patterns observed, and the impact that one domain might have over another. And an example of that might be if I had a child who had a hearing impairment. We could probably assume that they're going to have some difficulty with language just because of the impact of the hearing on their receptive skills. Now, as we move into the recommendations section, of course, the recommendations, I didn't give it the biggest weight here, but it's really kind of the heart of the whole report because this is why we put this evaluation together. When we begin to look at recommendations, if you look on page 192, you're going to see that they have support and service recommendations, and then underneath that we had functional recommendations for home and school. Just due to time constraints and where we're at, and because many times the functional recommendations is where we start to get into instructional strategies, which is, you know, I know a whole other class for you. I would like for you to focus on the support and service recommendations. So I'm going to ask you to turn back in your book to page 182. And Linder has a discussion there in regards to the difference between a service and a specific recommendation and appropriate ways of wording those. Last but not least, we're getting into our report format and proofreading. We really want to make sure that we have a family-friendly report, and so we need to be using family-friendly language that's free of confusing professional jargon. You know, we want parents to feel like they've been part of this, and we don't want to alienate them by using language that they're not familiar with or that they don't understand. The other thing that you need to be looking for as you begin to divide up your work as a team is how you're going to make this look like it's a cohesive document. And I know that's tricky when you have 4 or 5 people working together. So as you begin to maybe make your assignments for putting the report together, you need to consider how you might divide the work and still keep that cohesive element. So good luck with this. If you have any questions, be sure and let me know. Again, I just strongly encourage you to look at that report number 1 in putting this together. And if you need any help, I'm here to help. Thanks.